Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. There will be a time when I will say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid, says the US president, threatening Moscow and Kyiv with withdrawing from peace negotiations. The vice president believes the war will not end anytime soon and talks of a nuclear threat. And to discuss it, we're joined by Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening. It's evening here in Poland.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, it's afternoon here in California.
Right. So first of all, what to make of Donald Trump's remarks that he is close to leaving the negotiating table?
Trump can try to leave the negotiating table, but the negotiating table is not going to be anxious to let him leave. This is a problem that he inherited, but it's a problem nonetheless. And it's a problem that can only be solved through U.S. leadership. Trump has given a lot of carrots to Putin. In America, we say negotiations have carrots and sticks. And it's time for Trump to bring out the sticks. And so regardless of whether he thinks he's going to pull away from the negotiating table, this is not a problem that's going to go away for him.
Right. Well, Donald Trump also says that Washington is closer to one or with one side of the conflict. But do we know that it is Kyiv for sure?
Listen, I live in Ukraine, and so on election night, I saw the largest number of Iranian drones come through Kyiv, to that date. And so that was how Vladimir Putin welcomed Trump back to the White House. And I think that there's people around Trump that are giving him incomplete information. I think that, we see Putin just flagrantly disregarding any sort of ceasefires that Trump sets up. We see that when Trump says there's going to be a ceasefire on energy infrastructure, then Putin 2 days later bombs the Ukrainian power plant. So, the President Trump has not shown a capability of getting Putin to do what he needs him to do. And if you show that, then I think that's where the problem lies.
Right. Now, Xi Jinping will be visiting Moscow on May 9th for Victory Day celebrations. Is this the final confirmation that any attempt to pull Moscow out of Beijing's orbit of interest is futile? And will it be a sort of a confirmation that Donald Trump will accept?
Well, I think the most important thing about Xi Jinping showing up in Moscow is that he has told Putin many, many times that nuclear weapons should not be used in this war or any war. In fact, last May, he called Putin to Beijing to make him sign an agreement that said that nuclear weapons should never be used in war. It was a one-sentence agreement. So as Putin is rattling his nuclear saber and trying to convince Americans and Europeans and everyone else that, hey, you never know, I'm crazy, I may use nukes, this Xi Jinping, is not going to let him do that. And you can make the argument that Putin can afford to lose the West and use nuclear weapons, but he can't afford to lose the West and Beijing. So I think that with the relationship between Xi Jinping and Putin, that's one of the most important things to understand. And I don't agree with President Trump's assessment that anybody can pull Putin out of China's orbit. It just doesn't seem realistic to me.
Now, the 9th of May also has a deep meaning for Ukrainians traditionally, of course. Now, do you think that despite rejecting Putin's proposal of a 3-day ceasefire, Kyiv can still afford to attack Russia during the celebrations?
Oh, I think that, yeah, they certainly can. It's like, what worse is going to happen to Ukraine for attacking Russia? Putin has already doubled down on his missile attacks on Kyiv since President Trump was elected. So it's not as though there is a military risk in doing this. And in fact, you can make the argument that it would show strength to the world if they were able to do something that took Putin off his game during his May 9th victory celebration.
Right. Well, we know that Beijing is supporting Moscow in its war against Kiev. But the question is, could Kiev send its drones to Moscow during Xi Jinping's visit? Well, of course, Russians don't care if any Western politician is visiting Ukraine, and usually they greet them with nearby missile attacks. But as you said, it is not wise to anger Beijing.
Yeah, I think, while you can make the argument that, certainly Russia does it when Western leaders are there, I don't think that necessarily Zelensky needs to pick a fight with China. China's pretty big. They got a lot of military resources, and they have actually been pretty restrained to this point in fighting with Russia against Ukraine. So no need to provoke the dragon.
Mm-hmm. Right, now I'd like to ask you about the recent deal. What is the rare earth minerals deal worth to Kiev? Is this more than just a domestic victory for Donald Trump? Are any security guarantees to follow?
Yeah, so this is not just a domestic victory for Donald Trump, but this is a way in which Donald Trump can get money out of Congress for Ukraine. And we've already seen that happening. There's $50 million that came through like the day after this mineral deal was announced. $50 million is not that much, but it's a great start. And so there's a belief among Americans that we've given enough to Ukraine, and Ukraine is very far away and it's not in our interest. And that is the belief. That is not something I agree with, but that's the belief. So if you can make the case to Americans who think we spent too much on Ukraine, that, hey, listen, Ukraine's paying for this with their rare earth minerals, then I think that's a win. And it actually opens up a lot more doors for Trump and the American Congress to be more supportive of Ukraine.
Well, speaking of Congress, a proposal sponsored by Senator Lindsey Graham to impose new sanctions on Russia and 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil, gas and aluminium has received a broad support in the Senate. Now, is this a proposal the White House can support?
Well, this is super interesting. I used to work in Congress. I was there for about 7 years. And this kind of goes back to the first question, which is, can Donald Trump walk away from the peace agreements? And there's a lot of powerful forces in the world and in America that are making it difficult for him to do that. One of them is the U.S. Congress. The Senate has gotten, so it takes 50 votes to pass something in the Senate. But there's all kinds of parliamentary maneuvers you can use to get to where it has to take more and more votes to pass something. So the ultimate goal is that if you can pass something with 2/3 of the votes in the Senate, which is 66 votes, then it is veto proof, meaning the president of the United States cannot veto it. So right now, Lindsey Graham has put together 65 senators of both parties, 33 Republicans and 32 Democrats. He could easily get that next one. And he's signaling to Donald Trump that, I put together a parade you can jump in front of. Or we can get that extra vote, that 66th vote, and it can be veto proof. So if you're looking at sort of the intrigue behind this, it is the U.S. Senate, Republicans in particular, who are sending a message that we need to be tougher on Russia with these sanctions.
Carrots and sticks again. So, what do you make of the New York Times report that Washington wants to send a Patriot missile system from Israel to Ukraine? That's something new.
Well, listen, Ukraine needs the help. Like I said, today I'm in America. We're advocating for Ukraine. We've got a new movie out called A Faith Under Siege, which tells the story of Ukrainian Christians who are tortured and murdered for their faith. But, I live in Kyiv. We need the Patriots. Please send them. So, I most nights when I live in Kyiv, we hear Iranian drones fly by our window. And as you know, they have really started sending a lot, the Russians have, into not only Kyiv, but all over Ukraine. So air defense is actually the biggest vulnerability that Ukraine has. And that is actually, in terms of sticks for Ukraine, that's one that Donald Trump has. If he wants to get very serious about putting pressure on Ukraine, cutting off air defenses like Patriots is one of the biggest sticks he can use. The fact that they're now repositioning one out of Israel, which is a much more popular ally among the Republicans than Ukraine, the fact they're taking one from Israel to Ukraine sends another message that they're not going to use that big stick against the Ukrainians in terms of the negotiations, and that Ukraine seems to be coming up a couple of notches on the list of favorite allies.
Right. Last but not least, as you said, Stephen, you're usually based in Ukraine, but we have reached you today in California on your way to Washington on a special mission. Could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, as I said, we spend a lot of time educating members of Congress and policymakers in D.C. on Ukraine and telling stories from the front. We go frequently to the front. One of the stories that we're telling right now is that Ukrainian Christians are being terribly abused and oppressed by the Russians. Vladimir Putin has shut down every church in occupied Ukraine. He's made it a crime to have a Bible study in your home. So Christians in America are a big part of Republican support. They need to hear this. It's not getting out. We've got a movie, A Faith Under Siege, which hopefully TVP will show at some time on their network. But it lets Ukrainian Christians tell their own stories, people that have survived torture, people that have lost loved ones to the Russians, people that, again, can't worship God the way that the rest of us can because the Russians won't let them do it.
Let's hope this works. Stephen Moe, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Always great to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.